knight f3, d5, g3. We have the Reti system on the board. Bishop g2. Magnus trying to be flexible so that he can decide on what setup he wants to go to, and he plays d3. This is the King's Indian attack. Generally, top players play d4, but Magnus has gone d3, and that has forced Jan to think a bit. He can castle here, but he goes knight c6. He wants to play e5 in one go. That is his plan. And Magnus might want to stop that, but how does he do it? d4, he loses a tempo just to tell Jan that his knight on c6 is misplaced. But Jan doesn't even care, he simply castles in the position. And look at the time on the clock. Jan has 10 seconds more than Magnus. Knight bd2, b6. Is this all World Championship preparation? Could very well be so. b6 on the board. Magnus deciding how should he finish his development. He also plays b3. Both players fianchetto their bishop. And now, knight a5. Nepo says, I'm going to free my c-pawn to go to c5. But Magnus is like, Nepo, your knight was controlling the e5 square, wasn't it? Can I not put my knight there? And Magnus does it. He plays his knight to e5. Nepo pushes his pawn to c5. D takes c5. And you can take with the pawn, you can also take with the bishop. Nepo goes with the bishop here. Black seems to have a free-flowing position, a very nice center, but Magnus now strikes in the center. As black, you don't want to be taking on c4 because after bishop b7, knight b7 and knight c4, white has a bit more of activity. So he brings his rook to c8. Magnus also brings his rook to the c5. Now Nepo plays queen to e7, connecting his rooks, defending his bishop, and asking Magnus, where is your opening advantage as white? So black seems to have equalized without any difficulty here, and Magnus has to now be a little pragmatic and figure out a way to keep some practical pressure on the position. He takes on d5, Nepo takes with his bishop. He wants to exchange the bishop on g2, and Magnus goes back knight to d3, attacking the bishop on c5. Who is in advantage when this bishop trade happens? That is the question. Is it white? Is it black? Well, while white's king looks slightly exposed, one thing that is a big drawback of this bishop trade is the weakness of the light squares, particularly the c6 square in black's camp. For now, Magnus is attacking this bishop on c5. You don't want to be giving it up just like that, because then the bishop on b2 would be very strong. So what do you do here? One idea is to play queen b7 check and bring your bishop back to e7. That could just coordinate everything well. Nepo rolling the pawn in his hand, trying to think what to do. He goes bishop d6. And now Magnus can take on f6, queen f6 and knight e4. But that variation is perhaps not very clear in his mind. It's around equal, so maybe he'll just continue with normal play. He brings his knight out to f3. And Nepo re-centralizes his knight, coming back to c6. It's this position where Magnus has to come up with something, and he plays rook c4. Wow! Is this some kind of a bluff? Does Magnus want to swing his rook over to h4 and launch some kind of an attack? Nepo says, play it, and Magnus brings his rook. It was to provoke Jan to push his pawn. Knight b4, ooh, that's not a great idea. And now queen d3. Look at this, the pawn which was forced ahead is now attacked. And Nepo goes a6, the rook comes to c1. White now has the control of both the open files in the position. Nepo takes, queen takes on c2 has happened, and remember what I was talking about, the c6 square weakness. Bishop a3 has been played, but you can see on Nepo's face, he's not happy. Bishop takes f6, excellent move by Magnus. He takes on f6, queen f6 and rook to d1. Both his major pieces control the open files. You want to play rook d8 with black, but after takes and queen c6, The a6 pawn cannot be defended, so Nepo in big trouble. He plays h6, but the queen moves in, and a6 pawn. What are you going to do about it? All of a sudden, white is totally better, and it is all because of this idea of Magnus to provoke this move b5. What a great idea that was. e5 now exchanges, gets the rook on the 7th rank. Almost without doing anything special, Magnus has got a winning position on the board. Also remember, the knight can jump from h4 to f5 and this king would be in big trouble. Nepomniachtchi trying to figure out a way if there is any counterplay that he can find here. His time is now down to 30 seconds. He was much ahead of Carlsen on time earlier, but after making some great moves, Magnus has turned on the heat. b4 fixing these pawns, and now c2 is hanging, e2 is hanging. Magnus goes e3, rook takes a2, he takes the pawn on f6. Now the e5 pawn is also hanging. Nepo is almost losing this game. He has to figure out how to get some counterplay. He goes bishop c1. He wants to attack the pawn on e3. And now Magnus takes the pawn on e5, bishop e3, and he takes on f7. White is 2 pawns up, totally dominating bishop d4. He brings his rook back. b2. Is the pawn on b3 hanging? That would give him some counterplay, but now knight c6, bishop c3, and look at this next move, rook f3. If you were to take on b3, I go knight takes b4. So king g7, g4 has been played. Magnus is 2 pawns up, and in any endgame, 2 pawns is a big advantage. Rook to e2, and now rook to f4. The b4 pawn is hanging, and you can see Nepo knows that the writing is on the wall. He's going to lose this game. He goes rook b2. Magnus takes that pawn. Rook takes b3, and now knight d5. With 3 versus 1, the position is as good as lost. Knight jumps to e3. It is coming to f5, and Nepo resigns the game. What a game by Magnuscarlsen. Truly spectacular. It seemed like he did almost nothing and won the game, but in reality, it was a display of the highest level of positional play from the world champion, something that we all can learn a lot from. Also, you can see here, he is rearranging his opponent's pieces as well, which is so cool. Well, if you were wondering where was the key mistake of this game, well, then it was at this moment where Nepo played knight to b4. This changed everything in Magnus's favor, because after takes, queen d3, attacking the b5 pawn and getting control of the c as well as b files is very important. You might argue that after take, here this could be better, but still the queen is coming to c6 square and attacking these weaknesses. So the right way to continue in this position